Welcome. We have the Filecoin Green meetup every month, and it was Mark's idea. Mark, who's on the Filecoin Green team and is very plugged into the carbon offset space in the VCM, to have a roundtable discussion about some really interesting developments that have been happening recently in the VCM space. He's unfortunately sick. He was going to moderate this conversation and wasn't able to today. I'm Alan. I started Filecoin Green, and today, thanks for joining us. We have an awesome group of people who are going to be talking about the VCM, including Benoit from Vera, Amira from Solana. I'm not sure Gregory's here. Haley from Thallo, Joe from Thallo, Andy from Toucan, Anna Lerner from Climate Collective, and Alistair from AIDA. We want to. I think the first thing to say is it's been a week, right? So there's been a ton going on in the space over the past week. One of the things that happened was Vera, in the second half of 2022, asked for public comments about how the voluntary carbon market, so Vera and other groups that are issuing carbon offsets, can work with crypto and Web3 in general in order to tokenize and trade carbon offsets. Sorry, my cat's trying to get out of the door. If you hear scratching in the background, that's what's going on. And so this past week, Vera both concluded its consultation and released a summary of public comments that they got, which I think were a really, really good set of comments from a pretty wide range of viewpoints as to really what Web3 has to offer in this space, how Web3 can help with tokenizing carbon offsets, with scaling voluntary carbon markets, and ultimately sequestering, removing, or avoiding more carbon, and also what some of the pitfalls are, right? Like what are the boundaries that we should, or Vera should, set up around this whole space in order to guarantee the integrity of tokenized carbon. Another, as I said, it's been a week, right? Another thing that's happened over the past week, there was an article released by The Guardian. There were many reactions to this article about the integrity of REDD+ forestry offsets specifically. There were a bunch of reactions to the article. And I want to propose, a few boundaries on this discussion. This is a guideline. This is not an ultimatum. But I really don't want this discussion to turn into just like tit for tat about the Guardian article specifically. What I think it would be especially useful for us to focus on are rules and standards for tokenizing carbon, right? So the results from that public comment, what people think are the right boundaries to put around Web3 native carbon offsets. Secondly, how can we use open data to improve validity and trust? Right, this is something we think a lot about, especially at Filecoin Green. The Filecoin network itself has a huge amount of data storage capacity, right? The Filecoin, it's something like 16 exabytes of data storage capacity. This is enough to store all of Web3, thousands of times over, right? This is a huge amount of data storage capacity that we have access to in Web3. How can we use that to improve validity and trust in carbon markets, right? And then third is next generation methodologies, right, which a lot of people are working on here. I also just want to do a quick plug really quickly. If you are going to be in Boston in April 13th and 14th, please come to the Sustainable Blockchain Summit. My cat really wants out of this door. I'll go let him out in just a moment. If you hear that in the background. But if you're going to be around Boston in April, please come to the Sustainable Blockchain Summit, which is going to be a forum for discussing exactly this type of question, right? So it's a forum for bringing together people who know a ton about Web3 and people who know a ton about sustainability to work together on how can we use the new tools that we have in order to solve these problems. And so just to kick things off, we have an awesome group of people here today who know a ton about how to tokenize carbon, how carbon offsets work, and really where we should go from here, right? So if you could each just introduce yourself and spend just a minute talking about who you are, what project or company you're involved in, and what you really want to talk about in this space. So Benoit, we'll start with you.
Thanks for having me. My name is Benoit Clement. I am working for Vera as their Director of Financial Innovation. I am leading a lot of the work that's focused on launching our new projected carbon unit this quarter. I'm also spending a lot of time focusing on how Vera can approach tokenization. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Nice. I think I don't think we have Hugh on the call. So Amira, if you could go.
Yeah, thanks so much for bringing us together. My name is Amira, and I run public policy and climate strategy at the Solana Foundation. We advocate on behalf of the Solana blockchain, which is a really high performance, really fast, really cheap, and really energy efficient blockchain that's highly scalable. And in my role, I do everything climate related. That's everything from helping, just measure the carbon offset or the carbon footprint of the network, to helping figure out how we can build a stronger, more robust refi movement on the Solana blockchain. So I'm excited to be here and participate in this conversation.
Awesome. Glad to have you here. Nirvan.
Hey, glad to be here today. I'm Nirvan Ranganathan of the Climate Collective, where I lead technology initiatives. The Climate Collective, we are an innovation network consisting of builders, climate scientists, investors, and a number of other market participants in this space, all trying to build a more trusted and liquid market for digital environmental assets. I'm particularly interested that we seemed with the Vera commentary, we had the response and then the Guardian article in the same week. So a lot to dig into here, and looking forward to the discussion.
Awesome. Yeah, totally. Haley.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Haley Mahler, Chief Marketing Officer and part of the founding team at Fallow. I have about 15 years of experience in the climate and sustainability sector, and then have moved in the last few years into the climate and Web3 space. So at Fallow, we're building the future of climate tech, and specifically, we are building a platform for businesses and individuals to be able to buy, sell, trade, and retire high quality carbon credits on the blockchain. So we're proud to have pioneered what we see as sort of the first two-way bridge with a carbon registry, which we've done with Biocarbon Registry based out of Colombia, and we're looking forward to expanding from there. So excited to have a conversation today and be here with all of these great folks.
Excuse me, can I go next? Carl just hopping in here. Thank you. So my name's Carl G. I am a Web3 developer, like many of you guys. So I actually worked on FTX. I was involved in the dev team on FTX. So if you guys want to build funnels, let me know, because I have the skills.
Nice, good stuff. Joe, can we go to you next?
Sure. Hi everyone. Similar to Haley, work at Fallow. I'm the co-founder and now Chief Strategy Officer. My role is to build out the future of the carbon markets as it aligns with Fallow's ambitions and goals, how we see the near-term, medium-term, and long-term development of this marketplace and its association with blockchain.
Andy.
Hi guys, this is Andy. Thanks for having me. I'm product lead at Toucan Protocol. What we do is we build infrastructure to move value in order to respond to the biggest emergency that we have and the most concentrated manner that we can think of. And in that regard, I'm looking into anything and everything in regards to registries and to the supply side of the market. And I love, because you asked in the beginning about that, Ellen, I love to talk about climate justice and how we can actually use our awesome technology that we all love so much in order to facilitate that much more.
Yeah, 100%.
Thank you.
Can we go to Anna and then Alistair?
Hi, I'm Anna. I have some internet issues, so I hope you can hear me.
Yeah, that's
I am the CEO of Climate Collective.
We can't hear.
And
It's
Climate
glitching
Collective is
out.
you can't hear me?
Yeah, you're kind of breaking up, kind of robotic-y. Yeah.
Let's see if off video helps. Is that better?
No.
No. Okay. Well, Nirvana is here. He's the best. Not my colleague.
Wait, is it just me or
No, it's not just you. It's,
okay?
I mean, I think everyone can hear that. We can't hear you, Anna, just to let you know.
You can,
That's
I mean,
okay.
you can
Nirvan can
just, you know,
speak,
finish trying. Yeah.
Yeah, Anna,
Yep.
you can finish your introduction, and it is better with your video off. So thank you.
Awesome.
Well, the Climate Collective
It's
is a coalition of leaders
glitching.
and investors working on Web3 and climate. Nirvan is my colleague. He's on the call. He has better interests at him.
Awesome. Thanks. And Alistair, I think you're around.
Thanks, Alan. So I'm Alistair. I'm Director of Digital Climate Markets at the International Emissions Trading Association. So I spend a lot of my time looking at kind of best practices, both on-chain and off-chain, be that kind of standardized contracts, guidance in terms of how you should approach tokenization, and more recently, thinking through kind of blockchain applications for climate through our partnership with the World Bank and the Government of Singapore, the Climate Action Data Trust.
Awesome. Cool. What does, just so people understand, what does AIDA do? Can you give I feel like AIDA is one of these bodies that like is around in the space and is doing a lot of really useful work that like, can you kind of level set how AIDA operates in the space?
Sure. So AIDA has been around for just over 20 years now. And over the kind of 20 years, it's kind of taken on a number of different roles. Its core purpose is a member association, and so I'm glad to say a number of our members are here today, be it kind of Vera, Thallo, Toucan, etc. And so we represent the interests of our members, and that's mostly in the kind of direction of enhancing and supporting the development of carbon markets, both voluntary and compliance on a global basis. And so we help work with regulators in terms of guiding them as they look to regulate specific markets on the compliance side, as well as working with voluntary participants to support the work that they're doing. Hopefully that's somewhat helpful.
Sweet. Yeah, 100%. So let's like dive into a few sort of questions to start the discussion. I think maybe first for Benoit, and people can, you know, if you want to raise your hand, if you have something to sort of say after that. So, you know, the VCM has grown really quickly in the past several years, right? So the voluntary carbon markets have grown really quickly. So Vera has issued over 1 billion carbon credits since 2009. But we know that the outlook and future demand for carbon offsets really dwarf this number, right? Like these markets have grown quickly, but they need to scale, you know, much more quickly, right? If we're gonna actually solve the climate crisis. So what are some of the blockers from your point of view hindering generating credits that are both timely and that have really sort of proven emissions reductions that are publicly verifiable?
Yeah. Well, to start, it's going to require scaling both demand and supply. On the supply side, we're seeing a lot of issues when it comes to the quality of the submissions, and it's resulting in a growing backlog where project reviews, the monitoring, reporting, and verification that needs to be done on these projects is a significant obstacle. The more we can look at digital monitoring, reporting, and verification systems, or DMRV, that can be integrated into these kinds of projects to allow for more seamless data flows and for verification to take place in a more automated manner, we can get rid of a lot of these analog and manual approaches and processes that are not only prone to human error, but also not very time efficient. So that would unlock a lot of the supply side. Using systems which provide greater transparency can also help suppliers be able to see how carbon credits are being priced across the market more easily, which also can potentially help them garner greater revenues as a result of their projects generating carbon credits. There's also this opportunity on the demand side where by creating mechanisms that have greater transparency can allow for buyers to make purchases from a more informed place. This includes having readily and rapidly comparable data from the projects across a variety of different carbon credits. And yeah, those are at a high level, a couple of the different big opportunities that we see.
And yeah,
I actually have a question.
Do you see your hand? Yeah. Yeah. Your question?
Well, it's not really much of a question. It's actually, I kind of disagree with that statement on the current climate collective. If you look at the physiological backend of Web3 and the blockchain of Nirvan, like that's just doesn't work. So I just wanted to throw myself at the screen.
Okay. Yeah, I think we're really gonna focus on, I think, you know, some of the other comments from people. I think, you know, Fallow might be a good you know, group to go to you know, really that has done a lot of great work right in the space, looking at, you know, how do we actually like take the data that we have right on offsets and you know, make sure that people are able to get access to ones that are, you know, publicly verifiable and high quality, right? I don't know if you wanna jump in.
Yeah, I can jump in there.
Oh, gotcha.
Talking a lot about at the minute. Firstly, Fallow's approach has always been registry friendly. We believe that we can build off the back of a lot of the work that's already been done over the last 20 years, a lot of the great work that's brought the market to where it is now. I mean, I think there's improvements across the board that can be made, and no one's saying that that's not the case. It's just about how do we make those improvements in a streamlined and efficient way, and blockchain really plays an important part there. But of course, it's getting that data from the underlying registries onto the blockchain in a way that you can identify all of these key characteristics, and that's mainly one of the key pieces of work that we've built through the two-way bridge, is bringing all of this data over and being able to identify all of these pieces of information in the form of an NFT, but will be visually different on the platform, of course. But where does this go further? And I think some of the most interesting conversations I've been having recently is this kind of data point versus data stream idea. And what's great and exciting about the blockchain is its composability and the fact that you can consistently add updates that potentially come through DMRV and so forth, that can add credibility and long-lasting trust to single points of data that credits have previously been. And again, blockchain is a really good solution to that.
Also, does anyone want to? Well, first, Brianna, you have a question.
Hey everyone, thank you so much.
Hey, what's up?
I just wanted to ask a question on where you guys kind of collectively stand on NFT or soulbound tokens versus fungible kind of securitized products. From a tracking, traceability, MRV kind of data permanence perspective. Kind of my perspective really is like, if you start to roll up a bunch of these instruments on chain, then, and you're bridging off from off chain, then, I mean, you kind of lose that fidelity of the underlying data and the environmental integrity conversation. So I wonder if you have any opinions on, you know, where the market's going to be moving kind of collectively on either side.
Yeah, so I think that, you know, that really does get to some of these questions that were in the public consultation, right? That a lot of people submitted responses to, right? Like how should we deal with tokenized carbon in a way that we, you know, avoid some of these issues like double counting, and make sure that we that you know, offsets are really well tracked across systems that we may want to be interoperable, right? I don't know, Benoit, if you have some thoughts about that. And then I think also a good person to go to would probably be Andy from Toucan, because I know you've done a lot of thinking about carbon bridges.
I'm happy to provide some comments. I also want to.
I just want to say, who promotes AR or MRV, because I feel like that's kind of scamish.
Yeah.
We're not promoting scams here, right?
Let's really just focus for now on the you know, folks that are listed here, right? And we'll have some more we'll have some opportunity for people to ask questions after that. But let's can we go to Benoit first?
I just want to say I'm happy to provide comment. I would like to also maybe invite some perspective from Amira or Anna or Niravan, who are also working in this space and I think have some valuable insights that they may share on this topic as well.
Yeah, I'm happy to chime in here. I don't know if I have a strong perspective on this, Brianna. I feel like this is the kind of thing where I feel like as innovation shakes out and as the market shakes out, we'll start to see what people hew more towards. I think the idea of things that are more standardized and like fungible tokens make a lot of sense just for broadening the market, making it more accessible, making it less confusing to navigate. I think a lot of what's made carbon markets really difficult to navigate from, you know, an investor or consumer perspective so far is that people just like don't know what they're buying. Like it's so confusing to figure out how you can actually be helpful in this space. And so, you know, the opportunity of standardization and fungibility feels like it is important in terms of sort of broadening the audience for these instruments. But on the other hand, as you probably know, right, like NFTs, I think, and sort of less fungible instruments that are more true to the actual carbon being captured or limited is just much more accurate and, you know, can give us a much truer vision of what we're actually buying when we're investing in offsets or sort of nature-based credits. So I don't think I have a strong view. I don't know if that was helpful, but those are sort of the pros and cons that I see.
Yeah, 100%. And I think also instruments that are both financial instruments, but sort of pull the data underlying them with them as they move through the economy in a way that traditional financial instruments don't, or you have to like build extra sort of underlying data systems in order to show what this transaction really maps to, right? I think is like a lot of what we're building. Andy and then Nirvan, you both have your hands up.
Yeah, thank you. I do have a polarized opinion on that. And my answer would be both. We need both. And so we need fungible and non-fungible implications and replications. And the reason is that what we're trying to solve here is we're trying to improve an existing reality or existing market. And we try to empower basically the forces of the market in order to, you know, fulfill an issue that we don't solve efficiently by having to transact and having to communicate and having to research a lot all the time. So what we heard before from Joe was about programmable carbon, and that is definitely something where we need things that are non-fungible, so very unique, where you can filter down to a very granular level, where you can build out market functions that we have today that are filled by the market today, but very costly with hands-on, highly paid $2,500 per day consultants that create nice pitch presentations for you, and you have a very customized journey. But we can do all of that with technology, and we can look at all of that with non-fungible assets. And then at the same time, we can fulfill another market function for people who are looking more to buy and trade and behave like in a commoditized market. And we can also do that. And the beauty that we have here right in front of us right now is that Web3 for the first time ever enables us to have both, to have our cake and eat it, and rely on technology rather than on people, to have that balance being upheld, and that we can trust this duplicate state of a carbon credit being fungible and non-fungible at the same time. So I think depending on the programmable aspect that you want to build out, be it more of a commodity or more of a super down to the tree, down to the species that you captured on your wildlife trap or whatever, depending on the market function you want to fulfill, you have the technology, and I think we should embrace both.
Happy to go ahead after. Thanks, Andy. I agree with that. And Alan, as you were saying, I really do think, no matter where the token goes, it should be pointing to the same data, and that trail should not be broken at any point, in my opinion. I think it's the broader question of how fungible is this environmental asset that I'm tokenizing? Brianna, you're like, NFTs, fungible, and I think there's a big section in the middle that we don't use as much today, but semi-fungible tokens, I think, are used a lot in gaming at this point. But I personally, one can see how you can apply that to, for example, biodiversity credits, where you're keeping track of many different species, within one token here. So I do think there's a role for semi-fungible tokens, definitely, when neither non-fungible nor fungible seem good options. I think different environmental assets, it makes sense to tokenize them in different ways. But semi-fungible is something I think has not had as much attention so far. The other reason for that is I do think royalties and really streaming back, royalties from secondary market transactions back to the people on the ground who have, been contributing to these projects for years, is, I think, one of the more crucial roles that Web3 has to play in the broader climate finance market. And it's just very difficult to do with fungible tokens. You can do it with NFTs and program and royalties like that, but much harder to do with fungible. So just, I guess, weighing the different considerations and thinking what's best for your specific asset.
Yeah, so just to make sure people sort of really kind of grasp a lot of what you just laid out, Nirvan, can you give, I mean, I think people are pretty familiar with what a fungible token means in this space, right? So like you have avoided or removed carbon emissions and you don't care sort of what the source was, right? Like a ton is a ton is a ton, right? And so that's like where the fungibility comes in. And then I think in something like biodiversity credits, or maybe like demonstrating, land use, right? That land was preserved, right? That's sort of an example on the other side, right? Where you're showing that this particular land was, is like set aside for nature, right? So that's on this like non-fungible side of the spectrum. Can you lay out like, what do you mean by semi-fungible, and what's like an example of where it might matter all in the space?
Yeah, so just I'll give a very easy to understand example of what semi-fungible is. I mean, it's most commonly used in gaming. For example, you have a sword, shield, and potion. It doesn't make sense to have different tokens for each of those. So what they have is a semi-fungible, let's say, utility belt in which I can hold all of this sword, shield, and potion, whatever it is. So using that, I mean, it's not really a metaphor, but analogously for climate, one could imagine where the NFT, like the top level token, is, as Alan said, a certain polygon that demarcates a certain piece of land. And I think, as Joe said earlier, it's not just a data point, it's over time, naturally. But instead of swords, potions, and shields, you can have different species of wildlife that are animals and plants, natural wildlife that lives in that area, and you're able to track them. At least the token structure makes sense for what it is you're tracking. It doesn't really make sense if you have like 5 different NFTs that are tracking different things. This is one token that has all of the relevant information in one place.
Awesome. Haley, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, I did. I just wanted to make a point that and I'm not the Web3 expert necessarily, but I think that we've sort of solved some of these questions around how do you maintain the fidelity of all of the details of a carbon credit, which leans more towards an NFT model, and then also make it tradable and have a sufficient amount of liquidity to be able to make kind of interesting market transactions. And so Joe has just dropped in the chat a link to a recent blog post we did on a concept we are pioneering called dynamic pooling, or that we're calling dynamic pooling. So feel free to use that. And essentially it allows the user on our platform to go in and set their own filters and parameters around what carbon credits they're looking for. So they can say, I'm interested in Ugandan cook stove projects that have a gender equity SDG that they're meeting. And then they can set their own things like buy limit orders and kind of traditional market mechanisms for whatever pool they have set. But we are able to make it so that because of the underlying sort of mechanics of how we've created the architecture, that doesn't fracture the liquidity for anyone else. So I can be looking at that while Joe's looking at, Malaysian reforestation projects or something to that effect. So I think these are the types of innovations that are really important from a market perspective. But I do think it's so important, and I really like the question from Brianna originally. It's so important to remember, what is the point of this market? The point of this market is to remove carbon from the atmosphere, and the way that you do that is by having high quality projects that are socially responsible and that benefit local communities while also doing that. So I think that needs to be key in any solution that gets built.
Awesome. Yeah, 100%. And a lot of people clapping and agreeing with you there. Can we come back to the Vera consultation itself? And so, Benoit, you've been very immersed in this for a long time, right? How are you grokking? What are the key places where Web3 can really help Vera solve its goals and really scale these markets and help bring a high degree of transparency and public verifiability to them? And what are a few of the challenges that you really hope we can address over the next, 6 months or a year?
So some of the opportunities that we're seeing in this space are ways in which the project data can be made more transparent to the buyers of the carbon credits. This allows buyers to have more informed purchase decisions, and it can potentially create greater confidence as well in the projects themselves and the carbon credits that they are purchasing. Thinking about also the benefits of having carbon credits in a format that provides greater transparency is also beneficial to the suppliers when it comes to carbon credit pricing transparency. Also, just kind of more broadly, market transparency, seeing what other comparable projects are selling their carbon credits for would allow for project developers to be in a position where they are less in the dark compared to where they are now, where a lot of these transactions are fairly opaque. So there's opportunities here where Web3 technologies, through the use of things like public ledgers and tokenization, could increase that transparency, allow buyers to essentially make more informed decisions, have greater confidence and greater willingness to pay, while also project developers can have opportunities to see what's happening in the market and to price their carbon credits more fairly and earn the returns that they are deserving of. Those are a couple of the big areas of opportunity that we find exciting. In terms of obstacles, there's different risks depending on the approaches that are taken for tokenizing these items or looking at how blockchain might be approached. There's, as many of you are well aware, there's a variety of different ways where this can be taken. All of them have different pros and cons, and it's going to require some serious thinking around which approaches seem to address the greatest issues that we are facing right now, while being able to mitigate the risks.
I think that someone who is not sold on Web3, right, would hear the first part of what you're saying, allow people to have more transparency into these projects and, connect that with the offsets that they're buying, so they have a good understanding of what they're actually buying. They would look at that and say, okay, why can't we just solve that with Web2, right? And I think that obviously, I spend a lot of time thinking about this, and I think I spend a lot of time thinking about the verifiability, right, that comes with working with data like we do in Web3, right? I guess in your mind, right, what can we do in order to increase transparency in Web3 that's hard to do the way Vera and a lot of other groups that use largely Web2 systems now do it?
I mean, the carbon markets, when you think about it, starting 15, 20 years ago, I mean, these were built on Web2 platforms. So it's the current formats that are being used for the systems, the components of them are in these structures that are perhaps not as feature rich as we would see some of the technologies are in the Web3 space. So while anyone can go onto Vera's registry and look at any project and look at all of the different documents that have been submitted, all of the information is there, that current format is not readily and rapidly comparable across many different systems. So it's not as much of a transparency issue as it might be like an accessibility issue. For example, like, there's varying degrees of accessibility. So even that is, something to consider too. But the idea is with Web3 technologies, there's this ability to have these things reach new levels, new plateaus of efficacy that were not readily available when these markets were initially constructed.
Yeah, I mean, that's music to my ears, obviously. Like quick plug for, something that Filecoin Green has spent a lot of work on is something called CO2.storage, which is aimed at solving exactly what you just laid out, right? So that in Web3, we have this primitive that everything is built on called content addressing, which is where you address data by what that data is rather than where it is. So you don't type a URL into a browser and go to a server. You request data that has some particular fingerprint, and the network gives you data with that fingerprint. And so what we're really aiming to do is, in order to make this as useful as possible, like you're saying, sort of take that a step further and have not just the data, but the data format be content addressed. And then what that lets you do is define these transformations on data. So you can say, okay, I want data corresponding to this offset in this particular format because that's what I need for my process. So give me data, not just, as you can find it, but transformed automatically into the format that I actually need to make my data comparable to other offsets I'm comparing to, or in order to be input into a function that I'm going to be using. So Andy, you have your hand up. And after that, I was wondering, Amira, if you have some thoughts on what we've been talking about surrounding. I know a ton of projects are being built on Solana that are doing really interesting work, both increasing the supply of offsets and increasing the transparency of a lot of those offsets. So I was wondering if you could jump in. But first, Andy, you had some thoughts.
Yeah, I wanted to add something to the ever so old question, like why blockchain, and why in this space. And I'm fully echoing the transparency aspect of this. But I think what we need to keep in mind, and where we need to take a little bit of a user's perspective also, is that no one should really care what kind of technology this is, and should be looking into, is this blockchain or not? Is this transparent because of blockchain or Web 2? I can establish Web 2 systems that are very transparent, and if with enough resources, I can make them also very trustworthy. The point is, to me, I think, and the opportunity that we have lying out here is that we can create access, which was before very, very costly. So I put this little stagingly sentence there, like VCM the unVCM'd, but there's millions of people who could be participating in this and could steward land, could change behavior, and could actually reduce the whole pressure on that we constantly put and even increase on our climate if we enable money to flow to them, and if we enable, if we can pay for different behavior. And I think this technology can establish that without increasing, which is what we actually did the last decade, because we made it a gigantic exclusively expert market. Without increasing that and actually lowering the barrier to entry, we can get more and more people hooked up to all of this. And we can distribute more and more money to more and more people behaving the right way. And I think that's the part where, that makes my heart beat every time that I think about why does crypto and carbon markets work so well together? And it's because exactly of that. We all want this to scale massively, and we now have the gift of this tooling that can scale massively at a much lower cost and a much higher trust rate. And personally, I'm convinced that this is one of the gigantic benefits that we have here, and that we should definitely leverage the hell out of.
Yeah, 100%. If you have data that, firstly, like, you don't have to take all of your methodologies and assume that you have a data bottleneck, right? If you like have huge amounts of data that you're able to tie to these offsets, like what does that enable in terms of new entrants who are going to be able to, like you were saying right at the beginning, Benoit, like a big issue with scaling these markets is high quality projects that are being submitted, right? So if you're able to relieve some of those data bottlenecks with data that is high in volume, verifiable, and interoperable, right? How does that lower the barrier to entry to people submitting new projects? Anna, I think you were keen off of something Andy said, and then I did want to come back to Amira and talk about how people are doing some of this on Solana.
Yeah, just texting if this works. Can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay. I see Benoit nodding. Well, I just wanted to build actually on what Benoit said. I think the goal, or like a major barrier to scaling this market, leveraging this very unique technology, is to not make it feel like you need to adopt new technology. If we need to sell carbon credits and Web3 on-chain carbon credits, a double barrier to sales. And to really increase this industry and increase sort of the market, if you will, just going from 2 billion to the 10x or even more so that actually, I guess we hope for and we think we need for decarbonization goals, we need to move away from like a two technology approach and just like embed this technology where it makes sense and kind of like smoothen out the top. So it looks just like a better improved product, not like a blockchain product and a non-blockchain product. So that's we think of ourselves at Climate Collective as this bridging function to help translate what it means, help educate buyers, help like leverage the negotiation capacity of suppliers so that they are willing to take a risk on this technology so that we can kind of get over it's a new technology and just like embed it where it makes sense and improve the market.
Yeah, I really like that. I'm happy to talk about Solana-based projects, but I feel like this is such an important conversation that I kind of want to keep doubling down on, because I see people all the time and try to explain the intersection of Web3 and climate and why Web3 tooling is actually just so perfect for helping solve this carbon markets problem. And so I don't mind staying a beat and just hearing all these talking points, because Andy and Anna, you said it totally well. Benoit, I do have a question for you, which is, you talked about the need for sort of new tools and more fully featured tools. It'd be great if you could give us a taste of how it works right now. Sort of what does this push from like Web 2 to Web 3 look like? I think we sort of know what Web 3 looks like, but what is the process that like the life cycle of like a carbon credit will go through, and what are the tools being used? Like how does the process look today, and maybe what are the parts where you're like, man, like I feel like Web3 could be helpful for kicking this up a notch?
Okay. From a high level, you've essentially got project developers who, let's say, will want to plant trees in an area and receive carbon credits that they can then sell to the market. They would have to register with Verra. They would have to be conducting monitoring on this project. Through this period, they finally reach a point where they want to verify their emissions reductions or removals on that project. There's third-party auditors that are involved throughout this process. This verification of the emissions reductions or removals is sent in a report essentially to Verra. If the performance of that project is successful, Verra will then issue carbon credits to that project developer, which will sit in an account on the registry. On the buyer side, the buyers who are interested in purchasing carbon credits today will have to oftentimes go to the Verra registry, look at the particular project, and go through a variety of different documents which are found within that project's folder. This is sort of analogous to I'll use an example here. It's almost like if you wanted to look at a particular project, it's like stepping into a hallway, a folder where then each separate door in that hallway would be a different PDF. And within that PDF, you've got various chapters of information. So you're stepping into this hallway and you want to look at a document that is a monitoring report. You would step into that door and you're now in this room, and now you've got a variety of different shelves with different pieces of information. It's not currently in a format where that information is quickly digestible and comparable across a lot of different carbon credits. If you wanted to step back out of that room, back into the hallway, you then have to go and look at a different PDF, a different file to continue with your assessment of that project. This is a little bit different. I've been trying to find a way to compare how, say, a different format of having all of this data for a project and also for a carbon credit could be structured in a way that would be more readily and rapidly comparable. And I think of some of these platforms that we use on a regular basis, marketplaces where we're purchasing things. If you were to think of something like Best Buy, Home Depot, Amazon, when you're on those websites and you're looking at a particular product, there's oftentimes a feature on that website where there's a carousel of comparable products with their price points, the reviews, the ratings that they have. And those are essentially attributes which users have defined as being valuable or important to them. And I see an opportunity where this could streamline a lot of informed decision-making for buyers to be able to look across a wide variety of attributes instead of having to dive into every single project, walk down all of those hallways, open each of those doors individually, pull the information they find important, putting it into spreadsheets, making their own comparison. I mean, we don't have to do that today when we're going on Amazon or Best Buy or Home Depot to go and purchase a product. We can look across a dozen similar projects or products and make a quick decision based on the information that is important and rapidly comparable. So that's just a comparison. Like, you know, I was particularly focused on the buyer side of things. I will say, coming back to the upstream side of things, project developers are having to submit information from their projects that meet the methodology requirements under which they are seeking to attain carbon credits. Those methodology requirements have a variety of attributes which must be fulfilled successfully. And when the quality and completeness of those submissions are satisfactory, that is when carbon credits can be issued. However, when there are quality issues or incompleteness, this slows down the supply side from being able to provide the buyer side carbon credits. So ways in which we might be able to automate those processes through DMRV systems and using technological infrastructure that can auto-validate or qualify the data that is coming and compare it to methodologies which may have been digitized could be ways to streamline a lot of those processes and unlock some scale. And I just want to echo Anna's perspective that, yeah, it's not so much about focusing on the technology, but can we focus on the issues that we're trying to solve here and not get hung up on whether it's Web 2 or Web 3. I mean, it's not the technology itself that's going to solve these issues. It's addressing the problems, the concerns in the market that's going to do it for us. So, and we can use these Web 2 or Web 3 tools. You know, it's probably going to be an integration of both to solve these issues.
100%. Yeah, I think that if you walked into Best Buy and instead of looking at the product, you had to just like read a PDF of each product, it'd be a much worse experience. And maybe we can help with that. Alistair, I think you know, you do a ton of work, right, on standards that are really central, and you have a lot of visibility into how people are building, you know, data standards and quality standards that are relevant to a lot of this. Do you have some thoughts on how that work can be plugged into a lot of the tools that we're talking about in order to use sort of publicly verifiable and open data to give people a better look at what they're actually buying?
So as you mentioned, Aita,
does a lot of work around standardization. And historically, that's been kind of in the format of either standardized contracts in terms of how do you actually transact the carbon credit in the off-chain market, or in the form of the kind of Equero accreditation, where we kind of certify offset providers through meeting a set of best practices. When we start looking at kind of on-chain behavior, I think what we're looking to do is make sure that kind of tokens are representative of kind of what the underlying assets are. So making it very clear that consumers understand what they're buying, and making sure that those assets also don't become particularly convoluted. So when we're looking at pooling and derivative products, making sure that consumers really understand what they're getting themselves into. We've seen notable examples over the last year where I don't think, and I think the consensus is that consumers didn't really know what they were buying. And we've seen assets that have been massively overvalued go to zero. And so IETA's role is really to try and make sure that that doesn't continue to happen. The VCM has historically had issues with whole market behavior, going back to the early 2008, 9, 10 period, where we had legacy players selling credits at massive markups to retail. And that was hugely damaging and brought in a huge amount of regulatory oversight to the market. And I think more broadly, the VCM is keen to avoid too much regulatory oversight. Obviously, we welcome some, but we need the kind of innovation to flourish. And if the regulators come down too hard on market behavior, inevitably innovation is going to struggle to flourish.
So I guess as a bunch of Web3 projects, right? Like what do we want that to look like, right? Like where do we think that we have gotten good guidelines and we have an idea of what to build, and like what are the questions that we really want answered about what we should build and kind of what the path is going forward?
Exactly. And so IETA's done a bit of work over the last year, and have interviewed many of you in terms of what you'd like to see, and also kind of spoken to project developers and the broader ecosystem to understand exactly what's going on. And more recently, I think working with Vera and the other registries in terms of how do they support tokenization of digital assets? How do they support digital innovation of all sorts? And so trying to find this fine line between kind of really pushing the forefront of technology and also kind of bringing the market along for the ride. And so hopefully we'll see in the coming weeks and months certain pilots around tokenization in a very kind of sandboxed environment, just so we can really understand, okay, what are the implications of what we're doing without kind of going full crypto at the outset. Because the last thing I think anybody really needs is kind of VCM to be too closely linked to crypto, given what's happened with FTX and others over the last few years. And so kind of harking back to what Anna said, we really need to put kind of crypto to the back and kind of focus on the VCM and just making this as seamless and easy as possible.
I have just a question for the folks that are sort of the builders in the room. You know, my interpretation is the barrier right now isn't necessarily what to build. There's a million things that we can build, and lots of like amazing product features. But the barriers are, you know, how do we get supply online and how do we generate demand? And so this market can emerge. And once we sort of get a sense of what people want and what supply looks like, then we can start figuring out what features to sort of tailor towards different markets. But it's more of a bootstrapping the market question more so than it is like a which features are next question. That's my take. I'm curious if others agree.
I think from our perspective, the supply issue hasn't really been a big challenge. We speak to developers on a consistent basis, and many of them are looking for new ways that they can sell their credits or have their credits engaged in particular actions, whether it's on-chain or off-chain. What we find the biggest challenge is around the demand side and building that kind of trust and credibility with purchasers. And I mean, it's an ongoing conversation that we're having all the time, but from conversations we have with the larger corporate clients that we work with in Web 2, their big queries are around claims and the risk that's associated with buying carbon credits, regardless of blockchain altogether. And that's actually been reflected in some research recently by, I think it was BCG, that said that I think MRV was the most important criteria when purchasing credits above price. And that development in the marketplace really shows a demand for trust, traceability that isn't there quite there at the minute or could be improved upon. And this is where I think the conversations that we've been having have gone, rather than it being a supply issue per se.
That is super interesting, right? The like, because everyone thinks getting costs down, right? That's sort of what everyone jumps to as you know, that's the key criterion, right? Is if we can get cost below a certain threshold, that's what's really gonna unlock the supply. But you know, showing, right, research from BCG, you said it, saying that, you know, it's really like how much MRV is there, right? Monitoring, reporting, and verification. What is your like degree of confidence in the product you're buying? Like, we have a budget for it. The question is like, what are we going to do with that, and how can we guarantee that what we're buying actually like allows us to make really, really strong claims? I don't know if folks from Climate Collective or Toucan have any other sort of responses or reactions to that.
Just a quick build on that could be the South Pole's report sometime this fall around green hashing, where they reviewed large corporates, and they said about 25% of the corporates that have a net zero commitment are choosing to not talk about it because they're so worried about getting profiled in a disadvantaged way in media. And coming from a company, having worked for a while at a company that has a history of getting really criticized in media for good and bad reasons, Facebook, I can see that, like, I think that's a really big issue because it makes these corporates less hesitant to try new things, less hesitant to kind of stand up for their commitments. For example, in the Guardian article, pointing out these 3 or 4 corporates that are now looking like fools for having bought these credits. Well, they did it in good faith. They did it because they care about the climate, because they want to contribute to this existing market mechanism that we have. I think is not super helpful. So I think finding the data point on MRV being so relevant as opposed to price, I think that's accurate. And I think back to my own days as kind of corporate sustainability, a lot of corporates with funding are willing to do beyond value chain mitigation actions. And I think the definition of what that's going to look like in the future will kind of be expanded. And I think that's a great opportunity because that allows companies to be innovative, take some risks in support of a market or in support of a sector or in support of sort of mitigation efforts, without having to, have the offset versus kind of a scope 1 or 2 or 3 emission kind of equalizer. So I'm kind of excited about that. And yeah, I think that the transparency and data that's required to move to that point to allow for those specific, almost like purchase agreements is coming.
And so I think that's super, super interesting, right? So you're saying that when companies traditionally manage their value chain in order to increase resiliency and decrease costs, right? And so you're saying that as companies are moving beyond their value chain or beyond what they've traditionally tried to manage in their value chain, things like scope 3 emissions, you're saying are sort of increasingly part of what they're trying to manage. And you're saying that's going to expand in the future. How is that? Can you dig into that just a little bit more? Like, how do you see, are you thinking of biodiversity? Are you thinking of, in what ways is sort of a company's purview beyond their value chain going to expand that you have in mind?
There's already a mechanism around these beyond value chain contributions that companies can do and take as part of the science-based initiative that is not just offsetting what you have, but going beyond. And so kind of contributing positively to the development of a sector or the development of an industry or a technology. You could argue, for example, that Stripe's Frontier Fund, which invests in R&D, to generate these new removals is an example of going beyond, above and beyond what you have to do. I think that type of above and beyond will continue. I think the definitions for what will be kind of considered as above and beyond will be expanded. I don't think there's super clarity around that today because it's fairly new. But I think like my hope is that the voluntary carbon market and the actors within it will be able to benefit from this in a way, not just by looking for increased removal credits sold or offset credits sold, but actually like channel, like benefit from that type of R&D and like above and beyond types of investment to support the stability and the integrity of the market itself.
Awesome. And I'll highlight too, that's something that Austin Federa from Solana talked about at the Sustainable Blockchain Summit last summer in Paris in July, was how you folks at Solana are thinking a lot about that and specifically contributing to R&D for carbon removals. Andy, you've had your hand up for it.
Yeah, I wanted to build on something that Anna said. I think what we're trying to do is we're trying to apply and help others apply scrutiny to the market. We call it transparency, and we focus a lot on the supply side. And we think, we do that in order to mitigate market failure. So, that no lemons come into the market. But there is a whole gigantic motivated incentive machine on the other end of the spectrum that we should also apply the same quality and transparency criteria to in order to mitigate failure of the market. And I think it's very important that we look at this as a whole, like in any kind of ecosystem thinking. We need to look at this from all kinds of angles, and we also need to look at transparency along the demand side, so that people don't feel like, well, I'm sitting in the same boat as this company who has very bad rap and it's a silly company and I'm buying the same credits. I cannot do that. And this is just haloing across the market, making it again inefficient. And we can be very transparent at the one side of the market and enable DMOV for every kind of project, which is, by the way, still a long way to go for sure and very costly. But we have a whole very opaque black box. We just heard it. Again, that a gigantic amount of people are not talking and not, making it very easily reviewable and auditable what they actually buy. They have a label and they have a trustee in between who says, well, yeah, this was a XYZ certified credit, that's okay, but you never know what it was. So it's really hard for anyone to challenge this. And we need to collectively move the whole market to a more challengeable perspective, because only then the incentive systems that we can build in order, to bring back or bring in better quality and bring in nicer customers, bring in bigger checks from corporates willing to spend for their reputation. We need to make this position defensible for everyone. And currently it's lacking this a little bit. And we welcome very, very much any kind of initiative like the SBTI. And we hope that blockchain can also help out initiatives like this, because what better system, again, to help these kinds of transparency functions.
Yeah, I think 100%. And I think that ties in a lot to the thing that we were discussing earlier, which is about how can Web3 really contribute to this in a way that Web2 technologies struggle to. I think this is, as you brought up transparency in both the demand side and the supply side, right? Where in the supply side, you think about things like permanence and additionality and price transparency. And on the demand side, you sort of follow what the Greenhouse Gas Protocol or the Science-Based Targets Initiative tells you to. But some of that reporting could be a lot more automated, right? Like how do you match a credit to a debit, right? This is something that we've been having a lot of the discussions internally about, and also with like Gregory from the Regen Network and other folks, is what if we were going to buy offsets, for example, from nature-based offsets or from like removals due to regenerative ag or something, where we're pretty confident that the permanence is not, 100 years or 1,000 years, right? Like, what should the reporting look like on the like carbon, like matching a debit to an offset look like? Right. And so people tend to buy offsets that, if they buy an offset that they know is not permanent, frequently they only do reporting every year for emissions in that year, right? But like, what does moving towards some of these like life cycle of your project or company analyses look like that matches like the fraction of emissions that is still in the air from the life cycle of your project, matching that to not just data from offsets when they were issued, but continuous MRV data to verify that wherever you're claiming a credit to match a debit, those two actually like still match now rather than that they just matched in the past, right? And I think like that sort of dynamic reporting is something that the existing standards really don't approach or allow you to do or require, but that Web3 is super, super well suited for, right? I think Amira, I think you unmuted for a sec.
Yeah, well, I was going to chime in here. I think what you're saying about sort of real time matching of the debit with the credit is really exciting, and it's something that I'll call out someone else who's on this call, Haya, who's sort of an early stage entrepreneur that we're partnering with at the Solana Foundation. They're working on sort of real time monitoring of, I think, lots of different types of ecosystems outside of blockchain, but of validator ecosystems, right? So they're working hard to make sure that you can monitor to like the minute, I think, like the sort of carbon footprint of a validator, and be able to sort of aggregate that across the entire blockchain so that you have a real-time sense of what the carbon footprint of the chain is. And the idea is that I could, as a customer, sort of put down our wallet address, or if I was a Web2 customer, a credit card, and in real time, by the minute, make sure that my offsets are up to date with my credits. And so that sort of future that we're driving to is like not very far away. I think we'll see products like that released, this year, in the coming months, and it's a really exciting sort of feature of where we're going. So shouting out an entrepreneur on this call who's driving towards this future.
Awesome. Very cool. Good to meet you, Haya. Yeah, and I think those sorts of tools, right, are super, super important. And that's something that we've really aimed to do for a long time with Filecoin. If you go to filecoin.energy, you can see, just based on, like you were saying, the something that a lot of Web3 tech allows you to do, right, is get access to this real-time information, right? Like the block time for Filecoin is every 30 seconds. And so, use that to translate on-chain activity into electricity use into emissions in a way where you just sort of automatically have this DMRV, because the thing that you're studying exists in this like information space, and like use that to allow you to do this really fast reporting, I think is super, super powerful. So yeah, I'd love to talk to you, Haya, about what you're working on. Yeah, if you wanna chime in, go for it.
Yeah. Hey, thank you so much for the plug, Amira. Yeah, I mean, our goal is to help provide 24/7 transparency, both in terms of energy usage as well as carbon emissions, by using real-time grid data, as well as actual usage data from each hardware. And we're excited about this future where we can buy the right types of offsets and the right types of RECs, and make it available in 24/7, right? Super accurate. So yeah, thank you for the plug.
The one thing I wanted to ask about for just a few minutes, and then maybe we can take any questions from folks who are around, is this topic of price transparency that you mentioned at the beginning, Benoit. So I mean, clearly, like that's a huge issue in this space, right? Is that if the end price for an offset is relatively high, but most of that final price tag goes to intermediaries, and say that part of the reason that you're buying this particular offset is that it serves social good, right? Or say you're paying an indigenous community to protect a forest, right? But only a small fraction of that actually goes to the people on the ground, and most of it goes to intermediaries. There's often not a way to see that right now in this whole process, right? I don't know, what are your thoughts on, I feel like Benoit, you have a lot of thoughts on this, and I feel like the folks from Climate Collective also would have a lot of interesting stuff to say. I guess Anna just dropped, but Nirvan, you're on. Why is that a hard problem to solve, and what should we do to work on it?
Yeah, my thoughts real quick are that being able to provide greater carbon credit pricing transparency through the mechanisms we've been discussing would allow for project developers to more fairly price their carbon credits to those intermediaries. This is, to answer the question, like what is the difficulty or the obstacle there? It's a good question. I mean, there's certainly an element of technology that can be used as a vehicle for solving that issue of opacity. I think there's also I think there's going to be this initial hump of difficulty that would be faced probably for at least the first 3 to 5 years, where transparency is great when you have an entire market that's engaged in it. If you only have 1 or 2 projects that are being transparent with all of the project metadata and how their carbon credits are being priced and sold and traded, et cetera, while that's beneficial, if the entire market isn't doing it, it doesn't allow for very much comparable, it doesn't allow for much comparison to be able to take place. And that's where I think we're probably at least a few years out before we get significant enough adoption to allow for that comparison across a multitude of different projects, to allow for project developers to price their credits better, and also for buyers to feel more informed in their purchasing. Those are some of the obstacles. So like mass adoption would be one of the obstacles. Yeah, I'll pause there.
Thanks. Yeah, I very much agree with what you said there, Benoit. And just to add to that, I think the market is still in the fairly early stages, especially when it gets to some of these more exotic like financial instruments. So for example, one very interesting way of price discovery is it's called like a reverse Dutch auction. It's what they did for the Google IPO when they didn't know how to price the shares. It's a very interesting way where different people bid kind of what they value or the asset at, and without knowing what anybody else on the call or what anybody else in the auction is pricing it at. So that gives you, in a way, unbiased views of all the different buyers, and you're also able to get a pretty good price point. Then you're able to fill all the orders at the specified price point. So I do think there's some of these maybe more exotic price discovery models that are yet to come. All of them I do think is quite well suited to Web3. There was another piece that I was sorry, it's eluding me right now, but maybe I'll write it in the chat if it comes back. Apologies there, but yeah, oh, sorry, got it back there. So I think the other piece is with, you have carbon vintages, right, which is for the most part what we were talking about, but I think a lot of folks on the call as well are quite interested in carbon forwards. The thing is, I think again there it starts we bump into kind of dicey financial territory when you have like a carbon forward agreement that in certain ways can resemble a credit default swap, famously from The Big Short, which are highly regulated. So I think over financializing of some of this stuff definitely has risks to, inviting unnecessary regulation. But I do think there's this balance of checking out more exotic price discovery models, but also being mindful of not turning these things into securities when they don't have to be.
Yeah, I think that's really insightful and important. I don't know if anyone wants to key off of that, or if anyone who's in the Zoom call has a question or comment you want to make.
Yeah, I think we can facilitate that really well, both the protection against being, a financial, actually a security or let's say a very complex financial instrument that needs regulation to protect people, and price discovery. We can facilitate both of that with adding data everywhere we can and making it accessible everywhere we can, making it consumable everywhere we can. So that means obviously the data sources coming from the project developers themselves, but that also means fantastic projects like Gainforest and decentralized science, where people around the globe can actually participate in adding more data points and validating stuff on and falsifying claims, for example, even, which helps us in actually, removing this barrier to consuming information, which you pay a consultant for, again, in order to, do due diligence on your project that you want to spend a forward deal on, or an existing project where you want to buy huge chunks of credits from. If we don't have to make this an expert field, this helps us to make people have an easier time, bidding for it, filling order books with prices, because they could do their own due diligence on it. And at the same time, making investments an expert area where only a limited amount of people have the right amount of information to make a proper price discovery is a surefire way to get regulated and to be treated as a security, because after all, that's what the regulators are there for, protecting all of us against the few of us who know more than us. And I think we can, that ties a little bit back to the beginning of what we heard, like make transparency a cornerstone of this, make data consumable, have it readily available, and make it very inexpensive to get that data.
I think that's a perfect summary of everything that we've just been talking about. So thank you, Andy, for sort of wrapping together, right, transparency, regulation, interoperability, and really lowering the barrier to entry so that we can scale the market by using data in a more sort of Web3 native way. So I think we're going to turn off the YouTube stream for now. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And at least a few of us will hang out in the Zoom call if people want to chat or have any other questions. So thank you so much for everyone who both watched and participated in this discussion. It was really, I learned a lot. It was great. So I think